Hello, my name is Victor Buchli. I'm a professor of material culture here at UCL in the Department of Anthropology, and I'm the principal investigator of the ETHNO-ISS Project, an ERC-funded project which investigates the communities that emerge in relation to the ISS in low Earth orbit. Now, the reason why we were quite interested as anthropologists to examine the ISS is, to a certain degree, as anthropologists, we're a little bit behind the game here, in the sense that humans have been living in space for quite a while now, and the ISS itself is the oldest continuously inhabited settlement in low Earth orbit now, going on to 25 years. And so it seemed that in terms of the expansion of human habitation, this is an important anthropological question to be able to examine. So that, in a sense, was sort of the overall sort of problem that we thought of in terms of how you approach the ISS. How do we understand this new kind of form of human habitation that has been around for a quarter of a century, essentially? So one of the things that was important, not just simply in terms of how human habitation has expanded outwards into low Earth orbit, but more importantly, how humans live in microgravity and how gravity affects our understanding of human relations and various human institutions. But one of the things that was much significant and important in terms of how we understood the ISS was not just simply what the activities were on the ISS itself, but more importantly, how the ISS was integrated into communities on Earth. So probably one of the key insights methodologically in terms of how we consider the project is in terms of how we understand the Earth and low Earth orbit as part of one continuous expanding nexus of human habitation, which is very dynamic and expanding. It's not just simply going to low Earth orbit, but it's also expanding further out into cislunar space, to the moon and to Mars beyond. This is a profound expansion of where humans live and where humans thrive. And so we wanted to understand this relationship between Earth and low Earth orbit. And so one of the things that we found that was quite interesting in terms of the ISS is the way in which living and inhabiting and working with the ISS also transforms human relationships on Earth, and particularly transform the way we and human communities on Earth. And one of the interesting nuances in that sense is really not so much the very sort of spectacular, consequences of actually spaceflight, rocketry, habitations in low Earth orbit, or the prospect of sort of establishing colonies on the moon and beyond, but the way in which, in very subtle ways, human communities on Earth, terrestrial communities, are profoundly reconfigured. Now, not only are there important reconfigurations in terms of how we consider about human institutions when they exist under the conditions of microgravity, but how that expansion of that nexus of our inhabitation transforms communities on Earth in terms of the way space is integrated in terms of terrestrial communities. And so, in many respects, on a number of many of the researchers on the project have been addressing this question of how, in a sense, microgravity changes the way we live in humans on Earth, but how importantly, how living in microgravity and low Earth orbit changes the way that we live on Earth. And so, in many respects, these have been sort of quite unexpected. In my own research, I'm surprised how, as a result of sort of looking at manufacturing processes and how these are basically being supervised and conducted on the International Space Station, also means that certain relatively ordinary institutions on Earth, like the suburban home or the suburban office park, are profoundly reconfigured by actually working and existing in space. And so how that relationship between those two spheres, influence one another and change one another. More specifically to my own research in terms of looking at the new materials in space and the new forms of materiality, is how much of what is very significant is the way in which microgravity transforms understanding of material processes. How at the microscopic level, there are these extraordinary changes that exist that are almost quasi-magical in terms of their effect, that not just only are quite interesting in low Earth orbit, but when these are brought down back to Earth, changes radically how we consider certain the implications of these technologies as they emerge in microgravity and then are applied on Earth, particularly in say, medicine, for instance, how certain pharmaceuticals are possible that can only be created in microgravity in low Earth orbit, that then radically change how we consider medicine and the use of these sorts of pharmaceuticals on Earth, or various other products in terms of like 3D printing, or in terms of new crystalline forms, both organic and inorganic, that radically change how we consider manufacturing, both in space and in terms of their uses on Earth. So both realms are, influence one another and are radically reconfigured in relation to one another as a result of this sort of expansion of this nexus between Earth and low Earth orbit. That's my particular research, but I would say that this emphasis on these subtle nuances, in terms of the way microgravity changes things, both on Earth and in space, is one of the themes that sort of goes through most of the projects that have been conducted in relation to the ETHNO-ISS research project. One of the examples is in terms of, we think about in very traditional terms of, say, religiosity. One of our researchers is examining the use of icons, how icons from Orthodox communities are sent up into space, used in space as part of a global church procession around the planet, and then they come back down, and then they are basically incorporated in terrestrial communities. Both realms are radically changed in terms of our expansion into low Earth orbit. And this change is quite subtle and oftentimes quite small, but actually intensely profound in that sense. That is also related to one of the other research projects that one of the other team members is involved in, is particularly in relation to the overview effect. How a sudden shift in perspective in terms of the view that you might have from low Earth orbit onto the Earth profoundly reconfigures our understanding of human consciousness in terms of how the image, or how a new understanding of universalism might begin to sort of arise as a result of this shift in perspective the inhabitation of low Earth orbit, in a sense, enables. So in many respects, it is these subtle changes that are maybe not as dramatic as a moon colony or as a Mars colony, but they are actually really quite profound in terms of their impact, not just simply in low Earth orbit, but more importantly, in terms of their impact on Earth and how that reconfigures terrestrial relations.